Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us as we discuss ways of making human resources contributions more strategic and influential in organizations. Today is the second day of OrgVitality's virtual conference, and so far the feedback we've been getting has been very positive. I hope that you had a chance to attend some of yesterday's excellent sessions. For this morning, don't worry about taking notes. The slides from today's session will be shared after the conference. If you have questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Time permitting, we'll address questions at the end. If we don't get to your questions, we will respond offline after the webinar. Also, please take a moment to complete the brief feedback survey at the end of the session. That will pop up automatically as we wrap up. My name is Jerry Seibert, and I will be one of the presenters in this morning's session. I've spent my career helping organizations measure and improve organizational effectiveness, often partnering with human resources departments on their initiatives, and sometimes with HR itself as the function to be improved, helping HR define the value they deliver to the organization and maximize that value in the eyes of their stakeholders. And full disclosure, I spent a decade or so as a principal at Metrus Group with Bill Schiemann, my co-presenter. Bill is the founder and CEO of Metrus Group, a firm dedicated over the years to strategy, analytics and metrics, and employee engagement and fulfillment. He has 2 recent books on fulfillment at work and at home, as well as several books and scores of articles on employee alignment, capabilities, and engagement. In fact, we co-authored 1 book, Hidden Drivers of Success, Leveraging Employee Insights for Strategic Advantage. Bill has been a board member of SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, and HRCI, the Human Resources Certification Institute, among others. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Jerry. It's nice to be here with you this morning.
Our objectives for the session are 1, how to better position HR practice in a strategic business context. 2, to discuss different strategy typologies and how they influence important employee, customer, financial priorities and metrics. And 3, gain a deeper understanding of business strategy, balanced scorecards, and related tools that can more explicitly connect human resources practice to business decisions. And now to start, Bill, maybe you can lay a little groundwork for us.
Thanks, Jerry. And I guess, first of all, to everyone joining today, I hope you and your families are safe in the midst of this coronavirus epidemic. I know it's been a challenging time for everyone, and in many ways it's kind of highlighted the need for strategizing and thinking about where we are, how we deal with issues in the environment that are challenging us, and as we think about moving through this virus and the aftermath, what's the impact on organizations and our employees. And I think part of the reason I picked the slide that's up currently, it's based on the book Rise of HR, which was sponsored by HRCI, and Dave Ulrich and Libby Sartain and myself had the pleasure of working with 73 thought leaders, asking some questions today about strategy, about metrics, about the role of human resources in a changing world. And there were 7 primary themes. And one of the main themes was around metrics and strategy, which is what I'm going to focus a little bit on today. I think one of the key questions that we need to ask is what and who make you different from your competitors? It's a question today that you need differentiation as organizations. So before you start thinking about even talent, it's like, how does our organization going to compete and survive? And will we have the right talent to support that growth? Do we have a compelling vision? Do we have a compelling talent value proposition, TVP, and an employer brand? Will we be attracting the right people? And the other big question I think that's out there is the issue of risk, which obviously during COVID, we've all been dealing with how do you manage risk? And in the corporate world, boards of directors have gotten much more focused on this issue of risk and not just financial risk anymore, market risk, but also on human capital risk. Do we have the right talent? Do we have the pipeline? Do we have leadership pipeline sufficient for the future? How are we dealing with critical skills gaps? And even after COVID, and Jerry and I did a lot of work during the 2008 to 2010 economy, which was horrendous, we found that there were still critical skills gaps out there. There were issues both on not only IT jobs and things you might think of as emerging areas, but also some basics and clients who could not get welders that were holding up projects, or plumbers or craftspeople. And one of the things we learned is that there's a very uneven distribution of talent, just like we're seeing today with testing in COVID. A distribution of resources is a big, big deal. Who's leaving? Who's staying in your organization is also very telling. So these issues of risk will come up, and we'll come back to that a little bit around the home measurement issue in a moment. But I think these are big picture issues that lead to how do we think about our strategy overall.
All right. Well, I think it's pretty clear that leader buy-in really does begin with strategy. But what exactly do we mean when we say strategy? What is a strategy? It's not a goal. It's not an ambition. Things like increase market share to X percentage, or revenue growth of Y amount. Those are not strategies. Those are targets or goals. In the same way, saying, we'll be number one in our industry is not a strategy, it's an ambition. Strategies need to suggest how we're going to achieve those goals or ambitions. They need to be a roadmap to guide us and to tell the story of how we will achieve the goals. That's why corporate goals in and of themselves are not especially motivating. They don't tell employees what the strategy means for them in the trenches. People may very well want to help achieve that goal, but they really need to know how. So a strategy provides us with guidance. Do we want to turn left? Do we want to turn right? Do we expand our sales force into new territories? Or do we find new distribution partners who know the local ground already? And so in this way, they suggest pursuing certain paths over others and help us understand how to address the specific challenges that are going to be related to those choices. So strategies should be unique. They need to capitalize on factors that our competitors are going to find costly or impossible, or at least very difficult to copy. It is your strategy that differentiates your company. It sets you apart on your own path. A good strategy does not come from copying someone else in the same market. If I'm going to take on Amazon, it's not going to be by building a website like Amazon's, trying to operate distribution centers the same way Amazon does. That approach is not very likely to succeed. I need a strategy that differentiates me, one that brings unique value to customers that they can't get from my competitors. When Starbucks came along, there were plenty of coffee shops in existence, but Starbucks redefined the experience of getting a cup of coffee, so much so that they were also able to redefine the price point for getting a cup of coffee. They didn't invent the idea of a coffee shop, but they did take that idea and tell a new story with it. And in many ways, that is what a strategy does. It tells a story, the story of how we are going to achieve great things and reach some very big goals. It tells us what is our main purpose and our longer term goals. Where are our biggest opportunities for achieving our goals? What are the assumptions that we will make about the market? What are the likely demands and changes in the environment that we're going to be encountering? Who exactly are our customers, and where can we offer them the greatest value? How our products, services, and customers are likely to evolve in the near term, medium term, long term. It helps us understand what are the key drivers for achieving our goals that we need to track and manage, like core competencies or areas of operational excellence, values, capabilities. The story tells us our current strengths and weaknesses, the most important ways we'll have to change to be successful in reaching our goals, and provide guidance as we recognize the limits to our resources, what we will not do, which can be just as important as knowing what we will do. And very importantly, how will we measure and track key elements of the strategy? Bill?
Yep. Thank you, Jerry. I think what's interesting about that is helping people see maybe an example of the different models that exist out there. And I guess if I were to ask a show of hands from my speeches about how many people understand retail, probably most hands would go up. And if you think about alternative models to succeed in the retail market, there's certainly three dominant and maybe a couple of other models that exist. One could be the cost leader. And again, when I ask people to shout out names, Walmart, for example, comes up pretty frequently, or Target. Under innovation leader, I often hear Apple. And under customer intimacy, organizations like Nordstrom's, or perhaps a local boutique that provides really high customer intimacy, a shoe store. We heard a lot of that with Zappos, for example. So one of the things to think about is with those strategies, all those organizations can succeed. But if you have too many organizations competing in one area, you're likely to see losers, as we've seen in organizations who don't seem to have a dominant thread. The problem Sears has faced, moving from the dominant catalog ordering company in the world to a company that was marginalized over time because they weren't the cost leader, they weren't the innovation leader, and they weren't customer intimate as their dominant theme. So when you think about those, it also implies different values overall. So let's see, I'm trying to move this forward, Jerry. There we go. In a cost leader, efficiency becomes maybe a dominant theme that is very important. Low margin business, we've got to be incredibly efficient in order to deliver value, financial value. Whereas in customer intimacy, empowerment might be the biggest thing. We want a customer to know an employee when they walk in. We want to understand that for that employee to understand the customer's history, what they like, what they don't like. It's something that you get at certain operations. I get that at some of my local stores when they walk in and they know right away that, what cheese I prefer or the type of clothing I like to buy. The area of competencies is another one. An innovation leader, idea generation is really important because innovation leaders must have constantly new products that they're generating, and that begins with ideas. And for that customer intimacy model, it's great to have employees who stay a long time because they retain customer knowledge. And that customer knowledge is important for the success of that model. And even engagement, we find what engages people is different. There are people who very much like to do service, who like to serve others. You've seen it, those of you who fly have been on airline flights where the crew is wonderful and they're very service oriented, and you've seen, I'm sure, many that are not. But that is pretty important for a customer intimacy model, that people find value in service so that they find self-worth. Whereas a cost leader may want to find people who have task fulfillment. They like doing things often alone, or to be doing tasks that they can do without a high service element. So again, different models and different engagement, different competencies, different values for different business models. So let's take a look and think about your own organization. You know, what's your unique value proposition? And if you don't have one, I think, you know, it's a risk for surviving and not becoming a commodity, because that's really the threat here, is that you become commoditized and don't have something unique. So let's take a look back to strategy. What goes into strategy? And it's really not that complicated, but a lot of organizations do miss steps. And it really begins with assumptions. You know, what do we believe about the future, our markets, our competition? And this is a critical part. And often we have clients who will do scenario planning to understand this. What are competitors likely to do in the future? What kind of a world are we moving into? Is it going to be a world with perhaps 3 times as much government regulation? Or will we be moving into an AI world where automation is primarily the dominant way people work? Will it be machines making the decisions that employees are making today in many jobs? Is it a world where we will have primarily gig workers? So it's important to think about those worlds in advance and where we are today in order to determine what strategies might work in the future. And then the other key side of this at the top is purpose. What's compelling? How will we get the market? How will we get employees behind what we're doing? Do we have a compelling vision? When I worked with one of the pharmaceuticals a couple of years ago, they said, you know, we're curing cancer. I mean, that is a primary theme that our people come to work thinking about every day. You can imagine today the amount of labs that are thinking about solving COVID, or coming up with diagnostics, or coming up with solutions, or a vaccine. That would be like the home run, right? And motivated people coming to work every day in our medical community. So it's the purpose for existing from our customers' view is one, what would be engaging to our contributors, and what's adding value to our community. And an example here might be turn unconventional wisdom into value for investors. Well, that's great for the investors. And for those of you who watch Shark Tank and listen to Mr. Wonderful, if you are an investor, it's pretty important that you're getting a return on your money if you're going to put something into a new venture or into an existing one. On the other hand, you also have to have a vision that is compelling to other stakeholders. What will get employees excited about coming to work on Monday? What will get your customers excited about being part of your business model? The way Amazon has done today, and people have become so reliant on their ability to turn something around in days or even hours, are very, very important for their model. Strategic goals. So to deliver our vision, we have to have a goal. Today for COVID, it may be having that vaccine. We've heard 12 to 18 months, 5 years is about normal for a vaccine. Setting a big audacious goal, hairy audacious goal for doing it in 12 months is an incredible motivator for anyone in that field. What would success look like? People have to have a feeling of that tangibly. What would the headlines be, you know, in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or Chicago Tribune? You know, COVID vaccine found. You know, that motivates people to get up and work 18-hour days to help make that goal occur. There's a couple listed on this next page, and you can have a financial goal, which might be, you know, growing net income by 20%. You might want to focus on marketing, having the largest share in hospitality industry. But the people one here, is that a good goal? Take a look at that for a minute. Identifying key positions, ensure that they're occupied by excellent talent by December of this year. You think a good goal? It's not really a goal. That's the problem. It's not far enough out. It's a tactic. it's something that it might be very important. It might even be a driver of success, but it's not an end goal in itself. It's really more of an activity. So it's important we don't mix goals and activities together, which often happens in organizations. And then there are drivers. This is probably the most underappreciated area and often the one most missed when we do our strategy work. We'll have people have great goals sometimes. They got a great vision. They've analyzed the environment and the competitors. And then we say, well, what are your drivers and how are you measuring them? And you often get a blank stare, or you get a lot of things that are just really initiatives that really aren't drivers. So driver is a capability area where we must excel if we're going to meet the strategic goals. If you want to be a lawyer, you will not be able to become a lawyer unless you get a degree from law school or you can pass the bar exam. Those are drivers to take those next steps. Many other jobs require something like a college degree. If you think about this at the personal level, those are things that are important. We're finding people today are realizing that networking is a really important driver of future success in finding jobs. So there's a lot of drivers at the personal level. There's a lot at the organization level, and they're different. If you're a business with an innovation strategy or a customer intimacy strategy or cost strategy. So those drivers will support goals, and examples of those might be things like having a whole new system database set up by May of next year, or if you're an innovation company, bringing 5 derivative products to market in 2020. Pretty critical overall. And performance management system being put together that we might need in order to drive productivity levels that are a particular goal for our organization to get certain products. In the COVID right now, an organization might be out trying to test 5 different approaches as a lab to getting to a vaccine or to getting to a treatment, and they're working on those simultaneously. The goal is the same, but they might have 5 different drivers that they're engaging in to get there. So overall, if you look at the big picture here, kind of summarizing that, I think it's important to realize that no matter what vision you have, you need strategic goals. You have an environment of assumptions that you've looked at around competitors and the market and the future market. And then you have those all important drivers identified behind it. And I'll show you an example of that in a moment. But I think the key point here is that these need to be measured. And if you get what you measure. If you don't measure these things and you don't separate out these measures from a gazillion other tactical measures, you're unlikely to move your strategy forward. Critical point. You can't have too many goals. Usually we see 2 to 4 dominant goals for an organization being the manageable number, and 1 to 3 primary drivers for every goal area. When you get beyond that, it becomes unmanageable. And I'll give you an example of this for the airline industry. When we started out with the new models for low-fare airlines introduced by Southwest, by JetBlue, by Ryanair in Europe, and so on, what we saw is a different set of assumptions than what we had from historical models of American, United, Swiss Air, China Air, British Air, that were, much higher service airlines, but also higher cost. And it required a couple of principles. Nothing super complex here. High aircraft utilization. Why? Airplanes cost a lot of money. They cost millions of dollars. And if you're going to have aircraft, how do you keep them utilized for a higher percentage of time, which would allow you to drive your costs down? A lean, productive workforce. We've got to be leaner and more productive than our competitors in this new model in low-cost ticketing. Those are the 3 principles. And below those, let's take high aircraft utilization. How would we do that? Well, one thing we can do is turn our planes around faster at airports. 20-minute turns is a goal for Southwest originally. Originally, I think they actually went for 15 minutes. And normal airlines, have an idea what normal airline turnaround was at that time? It was about 44, 45 minutes. So they were able to leverage those planes much faster. Another one was efficient maintenance. Hey, if we have all 737s, we could have the same parts, the same supply chain. We would be able to have our people trained in one set of materials much better than others. And we're going to operate maybe out of satellite airports. We're going to operate out of Midway instead of O'Hare Airport in Chicago, out of Hobby Airport in Houston. These will be ways we can get our planes in and out behind highly congested airports. Same thing under lean productive workforce. Southwest originally started out with a model where you could have flexible union contracts that a baggage handler could go and help channel people on the tarmac into the plane, that a pilot could be out there helping throw in the last few pieces of baggage to help them make a 20-minute goal. You can't do that with rigid contracts that prevented that historically. So that's the model, that's the assumptions behind it. But the important part here is, how do we measure this and what does the framework look like? Jerry said a moment ago, telling a story. And it's so important to have a story behind your basic model and your basic strategy. Now, while this may look complex, if you look at the boxed areas on the chart, it's not. These are the same things you just saw on the prior chart, laid out in a flow diagram that goes from left to right. The right being the things that are end goals, net income, high return on capital, market share, ROCE in this case. And the things that are to the left are the things we do to get to the right. So in our model we just talked about, to get market share away from the majors, we want higher customer perceived value. And how do we do that? We have lower fares and we have better on-time arrivals, which are the boxes leading into that. To get on-time arrivals, it's the things we talked about: fast turns, satellite airports, efficient maintenance. And to get lower fares, we need lower costs, right? Low cost ticketing and a very productive workforce. And that productive workforce requires adhering to certain values, having the right capabilities, highly engaged employees, and a number of other factors here that went into to their model. So this is a hypothesis in the beginning of that business about, if we do the things on the left, the leading indicators, the drivers, we will get to the things on the right. And in all of our experience in this work, people who have a model like this and have measures, they're much faster at understanding what works and what doesn't work, what drives an outcome, what doesn't, and therefore how to make changes and tweaks in that model. It's a balance is the key, is that we have leading and lagging, we have long-term and short-term, and you'll see that this deals with different stakeholders, financial stakeholders, with customers, with employees. So it's a great way to turn that strategy, that story that Jerry talked about, into a living document with specific elements, with specific measures that can be managed. So with that, Jerry, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about the measurement aspect of this.
All right. But actually, we're doing well on time. So I actually want to take just a minute to answer a question that came in during our first section there, which was, do financial goals actually engage anyone other than the bean counters? And I would say, no, not likely. The goals themselves are at the strategic level are rarely motivational in and of themselves. It's the strategy and how it translates those goals down to tactics, to what it means for individuals, that have the potential for turning a goal ultimately into activities and tactics that can really have the potential to engage individual contributors.
Yeah, and
Would you agree with that, Joe? Would you add to that?
The piece that I might add to that is, I think that they do in certain environments. I think if you look at traders and Wall Street, they're very focused on financials because it's very much tied to bonuses in that industry. I think among employee-owned businesses, also, it can be very important because employees see a direct connect between the success of the business, which usually is not, the goal is just let's make more money, but there's a tie to something important. We're out making a difference to customers, or we're changing the world or the outcomes in some way, which then leads to profit, which then leads to us sharing in that success. So I think the money is a surrogate only for the idea of success in the particular endeavor being undertaken.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next part, talking about impactful measures. One of the hardest things with metrics is knowing what the important metrics are. Decisions on what to measure too often come down to what is easily available. What they should be based on is what will guide decisions, what will convey value, what measures have the potential to be a force for strategic change. In HR, there's a bit of a paradox right now. We have more sophistication in technology in human resources now than we have ever had before. Data is more widely available, and the volume of data that we can have access to is just tremendous and growing all the time. It's easier to report and disseminate data than it ever has been before. And yet, investments in human resource data systems often fail to yield insights needed to improve organizational effectiveness. Despite more sophisticated data analysis and reports, it's still true that HR metrics only rarely drive strategic change. I wouldn't say it never happens, but you would think with all the advances and our ability to get more granular and cast a wider net in terms of pulling in data and use advanced analytics and artificial intelligence, that we'd have seen, a whole new era in the impact of people measures. But that hasn't really been the case. Partly, I think it's because we're not always measuring what is most important to measure. When we ask that question, what is most important, or to refine that question, are we measuring what is important for different audiences? Because there are many measures that are important for human resources to track that are essential for monitoring HR operations. But those same measures won't necessarily convey strategic value to the C-suite. As just one example, take talent acquisition. Number of requisitions filled is an important operational metric, but it's an indicator of activity or perhaps efficiency at best. Better would be some indicator of effectiveness, such as whether the recruited talent that we've brought on board is staying with the organization for some defined period of time. Right? Are we bringing in new people? Are they staying at least a year? Or are we suffering churn where they're gone again in 90 days? That could tell us if we are selecting good matches for our culture. But even better would be a quality of hire metric that conveys impact, telling us how well the talent we're bringing in, for example, is meeting customer needs. now we're getting into a domain that is much more likely to resonate with senior leaders than knowing that 85% of requisitions are filled in 30 days. It's important for us in HR, not the information that's critical to communicate at the C-suite. Another challenge is that far too often, vital decisions about talent are addressed with limited evidence or faulty logic. Does your organization have a logical, numbers-based approach to understanding the payoffs from things like improved employee health or supporting employees' mental health, something very important in our current crisis? How about from improvements in how employees are recruited, selected, or onboarded, or from reductions in turnover, or improvements in how employees are developed? In many organizations, leaders approach people measurement and metrics with far less rigor and analysis than questions about other resources, such as finance or customer behavior and loyalty, or technology investments. And yet, human capital measures do have immense potential to improve the decisions of leaders. Earlier, Bill shared this grid to illustrate how different value propositions are reflected in different strategies. But it's not a big leap to apply this to a very practical decision, such as what questions we should include in our employee survey. If you think about the three strategies that Bill described and that are listed here, it becomes clear quite quickly that the types of questions need to vary based on the strategy. One organization may need more items addressing manager openness to new ideas, or the level of comfort staff have when making suggestions. Those are things that, if you are aiming to be an innovation leader, are going to be very important for you. Another will give more attention to questions on process efficiency. Are managers removing roadblocks? Or perhaps questions about knowledge transfer. Any of those questions would be useful to any of the companies. But when you have to choose what to include and what to exclude so that your survey is manageable in terms of length, connections to your strategy make for a very good decision criterion. So we have our strategy, and let's say we've got some of the right measures of the strategy. How would we use that to allocate limited resources and do so in a way that is going to add the greatest value to the business? That is to say, is going to have some strategic impact.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. I think that this issue of resource comes up frequently. And one of the things we've learned, and I guess I was fairly surprised going back when we began doing some of the work in this area and looking at strategic measures. And we finish a project with an organization, having worked on their strategy, having worked on their drivers, maybe scenario planning at the front end. And all of a sudden, we've got these metrics. We've got these, picture that airline set of metrics. We've got, maybe three, four goal metrics, and we've got a number of drivers. And then you'd say, well, how are you guys setting up your initiatives for the year? And I had conversations with many CFOs, and I would ask the question, so how do you guys make choices about what you're going to fund? And I remember talking to one CFO for a large pharmaceutical company. He said, we get probably 700-800 requests for what they considered, major initiatives for the year that would come in from the various departments and groups and business units. And he said, the reality is we could probably fund 100 and some out of that group of 800 every year from a financial standpoint. So I said, well, how do you choose? How do you choose those? And he said, well, people go through this whole process and they work up a proposal and they show the ROI of that measure. And I said, yeah, I've seen it in a lot of organizations. And ultimately, you kind of look at the ROI. People have learned to play the game. Everyone knows that you build a model with a hockey stick look that 3 years out, the world is saved and my department is in glory if you give us this money. So I said, how do you audit how well those worked? He said, well, to be honest with you, we don't really have time. We don't have the staff and the resources to go back and look at how those actually turned out. And I was floored early in my career when I'd hear answers like that. Like, we went through this whole process to build a set of initiatives, and we never found out whether they worked or not in moving the strategic needle. And what I realized as we began doing this work, that the key here was, how do we allocate our resources far more strategically, and that we weren't necessarily sub-optimizing business outcomes in micro pockets where we could show the ROI, which was great, but it might not be the ROI that's great in our environment as a innovation leader, or it might not be the ROI that would be great in our model of customer intimacy. So you've got your strategy here on this, you can see on the left of the diagram, and the metrics Jerry's talked about, and the drivers. How will we allocate those resources so that we are more likely to be able to get to the results, to find out what our progress is to reach the targets? So if you'll move to the next chart, Jerry, on this. Thanks. If you look at the top of the diagram, you'll see strategic goal 1 through 4. Strategic goal 1 and 3 are indicated in green, showing they're doing pretty well. We're on our path to those goals. Strategic goal 2, the yellow indicates we're a bit behind, and that's going to need more emphasis. The strategic goal 4, we're way behind. Important goal. And what you see on the left is a group of initiatives. So what initiative 1 says is, if we do initiative 1, we expect it to have a dominant direct impact on goal 1 and a secondary impact on goal 3. Initiative 2 would have a dominant on and direct on goal number 2. So I would hope that the immediate thing that jumps out at you is that, hey, we don't have a lot of initiatives moving goal number 4, which is our biggest gap. Where are we? What are we going to do that's going to change us getting to goal 4? And it looks like we've put 2 initiatives at least that should have some direct impact on goal 2, which is behind initiative number 2 and initiative 5. And the question is, do we need as much emphasis on initiatives funding goal 1 and 3, since we're in the green already and they are taking resources? So one alternative is to think about, if you pop up the next one, Jerry, how might we reallocate these or think about initiatives that are missing here? And in this case, initiative 6 and 7 now, we've added have a direct impact on goal number 4. And number 7 has a secondary impact on goal 3. Number 6, secondary on that yellow goal number 2. So that's something I think to think about, and in terms of how we do that. And if we have to pull resources and money from somewhere, perhaps we can take some of it from things that are already in the green, such as initiative 1 or initiative 3, that may be reallocated down to these others. And one thing we found is that this is a far better way than the ROI approach. Number 1, it really says our hypothesis is that if we invest in initiative 6, that we should be seeing goal number 4 begin to improve. It's supposed to have a direct impact. We should see some help with initiative number 6. And if we don't, then it's also a way to come back and say, perhaps that initiative was underfunded. Perhaps we didn't have enough critical mass in it. Maybe we didn't execute it well. Or maybe that initiative doesn't really have an impact on goal number 4. And an opportunity for us to kind of quickly retune where we're spending money and change the focus of those initiatives. And in working with engineering companies that we've done a lot of with oil companies, for example, or accounting firm, the question is always asked, should we put numbers on these and, run them out to 6 decimal places? They love to put the numbers on this chart instead of the D's and the S's. We found that there was very little marginal value to actually quantifying those D's and S's. That it's a strategic decision here about impact that really makes the difference. And whether someone says this is a 1.0 or a 1.2 impact didn't add a lot of additional value, and frankly spent more time in analysis paralysis. So this is a way to think about connecting now your strategy to the metrics, which are on your goals on the top, to initiatives on the left-hand side that will be part of what's moving your drivers in the organization. And with that, if your measurement systems aren't helping you make decisions and they're not helping you drive strategic change, then they're really not the right kind of measures to have in place. Jerry?
All right, thanks, Bill. So one other topic we wanted to touch on was, even assuming you've got some of the right metrics and your HR strategy is closely connected to the business strategy, you still have to communicate all that, and you still have to package it in a way that is going to be effective for the C-suite. A basic rule here is, your metrics must be relevant to the audience. So no HR operational data here, only stats that can translate pretty clearly to business impact. When you get in front of an audience like this, you do need to, get to the point, get to the implications quickly. Give an executive summary of how the information connects to business strategy and goals. A lot of HR, data professionals want to tell a story from the ground up, building the case for their points. The C-suite, on the other hand, often wants to hear the punchline and then let you defend it with evidence. You do not want to find yourself laying groundwork when your audience is already several steps ahead of you. Take a quantitative approach, quantify the problem. For example, cost of turnover, lost productivity, lost customers. That's to establish a rationale for the value of the investigation or the initiative and the findings. The hardest pitch is showing opportunity costs or what might happen. Very difficult in this environment. That approach can work, but you need to have very deep knowledge and be fully prepared, because with the C-suite, assumptions will be challenged. You need to make sure that your assumptions are sound and conservative. They will be tested. Try to think through alternative hypotheses in advance so that you can have thoughtful responses at the ready and not become defensive or uncertain. And put yourself in the executive's mindset. What are they focused on? Things being done better, faster, cheaper? Are they focused on growth? Where are they at? What is keeping them up at night? Understand that, and you'll be better able to position your case. Not to mention, you'll appear maximally relevant to the issues of the day. So in closing, let's sum up some of the key points from our discussion today. The talent marketplace is changing. HR research and practices need to adapt to stay relevant. In one of the sessions yesterday, PepsiCo described their leader development program, a program developed with science and rigor, so well constructed and effective that it's won multiple awards. And at the end, PepsiCo explained that even with all that, the program is being substantially updated today. Even the best initiatives and programs can't be set in stone. They need to adapt to the current business environment. Organizations must differentiate to compete and remain viable, including talent differentiation. As we said, you can't win by copying your competitors. By definition, that is not a unique strategy. It's true for the business strategy and true for the talent strategy. The employee value proposition that you bring to the talent marketplace has to be as unique as you can make it. In the last couple of months, that marketplace has been completely upended as we've gone from record low unemployment to record high unemployment practically overnight. And as the way we work is shifting dramatically with millions of people learning to do their jobs from home, a lot of what we might have based our value proposition on in the past may no longer become relevant. I mean, if this becomes the new normal, how will you differentiate your work experience? When the perks that come with lush campuses are irrelevant, what else sets you apart in the competition for talent? These are issues that we should be considering now, not 3 or 6 months from now. Strategy requires meaningful strategic measures, often informed by the value chain. The measures you report as an HR function must be metrics with clear implications for strategic goals. You need to determine, what are the best strategic measures that will communicate value, going beyond the operational, important, perhaps, but still, HR-focused operational measures that you need for running your part of the business. HR strategies, should be linked to the business strategies. Think about your decisions on why you are doing certain things, what investments you are making, and what initiatives you choose to deploy. To what extent are those choices explicitly linked to the corporate strategic plan? Can you draw a straight line from one to the other, or explain to the leader of a business unit how they connect? If you were to make a matrix of your major initiatives with the company's strategic goals, like the one Bill shared a few minutes ago, what would you learn? How well aligned would they be? Metrics add value only if they improve decisions about talent and how it is organized. They need to have the potential to directly improve decisions at multiple levels within human resources and in the C-suite. Just because a metric is important and helpful to you does not mean it is right to share with other leaders. The right metric for the same thing can even vary by audience. If you were to take a new training program for call center reps, for example, your training function in HR will want to know how participants evaluate the program, of course. Let's say they thought it was the best training they ever received. Nice, but not so relevant at higher levels. You need to show the C-suite that the initiative moves the organization closer to strategic goals. The training results in improved complaint resolution, which means higher customer loyalty, which converts directly to bottom line impact. At a different level, say for the head of customer service, you could show how the program has led to fewer service escalations to supervisors who now have more time for coaching, helping the entire call center meet its operational goals. So the right metric really depends to an extent on the audience as well. And HR needs to market and package its solid work more effectively. There are so many things that HR does which help drive the business. hiring people with a passion for service, providing the right training at the right moment, deploying strategies for retaining your best people, influencing the company's strategy and shaping the culture. These are, some of the things that when HR does them well, they have a pretty powerful impact on the business. But communicating that effectively can be a challenge. Telling the story in a way that resonates with the C-suite is, in fact, an essential part of maximizing the value that HR delivers within the organization.
Jerry?
Yes.
Before you move to the close on that, we had a question that came up from George that says, can you provide examples of common HR metrics that lack rigor and how their rigor can be improved? And I'll take a shot, and you may have a thought too, but I think a good example is around the context that it's being used as well. One of the grossly misunderstood metrics is turnover. It's often measured wrong. It's often under calculated. And in some businesses, it's also very much a lagging measure. So it can be useful, but you have to say, if we knew the information about this, what decisions would it help us influence? Another one would be close rates on time to fill. And if your organization is filling jobs faster and employees are just going out the back door in turnover, how is it helping us? We need to think about the impact. Or if they're actually staying in the organization and they're terrorizing customers, that's the more important impact measure. Training is another area where we've got a lot of level 1 metrics in the Kirkpatrick model that people don't move on, don't look at transfer training. They measure a gazillion things that I'd say sometimes take up a lot of resources and don't add necessarily as much rigor. So I would argue for sometimes fewer metrics, but the more important ones in there. And if you're more interested in talking about that at some point, you can contact us also again after the webinar.
Yeah, no, those are great examples, Phil. And another question that has come up is, are the assumptions underlying financial decisions challenged as much as those underlying HR decisions? What's your thought on that, Phil?
Say again, Jerry?
Are the assumptions underlying financial decisions challenged as much as those underlying HR decisions?
I think the issue of challenge is what's the credibility? And I think finance goes back many, many, many years before HR in terms of metrics. And so I think people have grown up with a set of metrics that are kind of accepted, some good and some bad. There's a lot of criticism today around budgeting metrics, for example, and a whole movement called Beyond Budgeting, which says there's no possible way you can know probably 6 months in advance what the next year is going to hold. Note coronavirus, right? And we're going to give you a budget and you're going to have to manage to that and do it well. I think there's a lot of cynicism in organizations about the credibility even of the financial metrics. I think there's HR metrics that can be shown over time to be really valuable. And I know, Jerry, you covered in one of your workshops yesterday some information on the Jack in the Box story and how they used their engagement and their alignment and capabilities measures to prove to management, right, that those drive the profitability of restaurants, that they drive customer satisfaction, and that they drive operational efficiency. So I know we're running lower on time, but again, happy to share that with anyone later if they'd like more detail.
All right. Yes, we are. We're down to our last minute. So we just wanted to close with a little bit of a challenge to ask you folks to think about, starting tomorrow, what one or two or three things might you do differently? And, as you think about that, think also about who you might share that with. One of the things we've learned is that when people share their goals and their intentions, they're more likely to stick to it. So we encourage you to prioritize that. Um, just to, as final closing here, just a reminder, if you haven't been to the earlier sessions, let you know that we do have an employee well-being and business resilience survey that is available. It is available free to any organization, clients and non-clients as well. Already been completed by more than 35,000 employees worldwide. So we will in the future be sharing some benchmark results from that survey as well. With that, I want to thank everyone for their time and encourage you to attend the upcoming sessions on artificial intelligence, a primer for HR, and framing your survey, tactics to get executives excited.
And thank
Thank
you,
you all
Jerry. Thank you and
very much.
OrgVitality for putting together this series. I think it's been very enlightening.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.